lot of blood pooled under his chest. Scary.
Professor Weiser was horribly murdered in the sanctity of his own home. This case rocked our community.
I overheard a gentleman talking about how he ended up shooting the kids.
You very well could have a killer on campus. Come up with your hands up. Let me see your hands.
Whether he's your brother or not, man, it's not worth going to jail for murder over it. Oh,
The defense would say, how can you prove that my client shot the professor?
It was hard to see someone have to turn on the brother. I had to have that for trial. I had to.
For those most affected by a homicide,
there you go, buddy.
the first 48 is just the beginning. This is the story of the fight for justice in the weeks, months, and years.
We're going to the 4th precinct near the University of South Alabama. Campus police officers responded to a residence owned by a professor and found the professor deceased in the middle of this hallway. I've always felt like it was my calling to be a homicide detective. I believe that God wanted me to use all the skills and the traits that he's given me to give these families justice that they deserve.
They arrived here at 1527.
You're talking about campus PD?
Yeah. The front door was locked. The back door was closed, but it eased open once he kind of pushed on it a bit. Up the stairs, they saw the body laying on the left, face down.
What's the victim's information?
Matthew Weiser.
39-year-old Dr. Matthew Weiser taught economics and specialized in a branch of mathematics called game theory. He leaves behind his father and brother.
There's no witnesses, there's no video cameras. Do they know if he lives with anybody?
I think he was staying here by himself.
The way I look at investigations is somewhat like a puzzle.
When we get to a crime scene, there's one piece of that puzzle that's in place, and that's the victim. There's a lot of blood pooled under his chest.
Matt was shot once through the chest.
Door to the left, there's a pretty good sized hole. He was just standing right here in the threshold. And there's all these other pieces and they're all strewn about. And until you put them in the right order, it doesn't reveal the full picture of what actually happened. This hole goes from the outside inside. If he was shot in the hallway and the bullet went through the door, that would make sense.
In Matt's bedroom, the team finds that single bullet, but no shell casings.
The revolver doesn't eject a shell casing like a semi-automatic pistol would. So we believed that we were dealing with somebody that was carrying a revolver.
They tried this door open.
Clearly, this door was forced open because you got all this wood. You can clearly see this kind of like sneaker print. So they had to then kick the door after they pried it open. Now we have an idea that if an intruder kicked in his back door, alerted the professor, they went upstairs and they encountered him right in the hallway. And they shot him almost at point blank range. Scary. Makes me think of my wife right now who's at home with our son.
At that point, I had suggested that we inventory the residence. If something is missing, we might be able to track that down.
He's got a Nintendo Switch controller right there.
Yeah, and the Switch games are over there, but I don't see a Switch.
There are accessories for a video game,
Maybe they stole the Switch.
but no sign of the console.
Is this a random act of violence? Somebody broke in, found him in the house, shot him? Or is there something deeper going on? Is this a scorned student for a bad grade? So now we have to build a timeline of his last 24 hours.
A secretary in Matt's department requested the welfare check. Barton reaches out to her.
Do you know if he was supposed to have class?
He had office hours today. He had a driver that supposed to pick him up at 12 and got concerned when he couldn't get a hold of him.
I went to the house and knocked on the door, sent him a text, called, and then he just never replied. So I was like, hey, you're causing concern here. You need to reply, and he didn't. Later on, when I was going home, there were police cars, and lots of them. And they were like, he was murdered. It was shocking.
Did it make any sense?
No. It still doesn't make any sense. It still doesn't make sense.
The challenges at this point are tremendous. We're dealing with the definition of a whodunit. We have no witnesses, no cameras, and really not a clear timeline. So I felt like the deck was stacked against me for sure.
17 hours in.
Let me collect this.
We instantly started asking the campus for his voicemails, his emails, to see if there was any evidence or any clues that would lead us to somebody there.
And if a student did kill him, will they kill another teacher? Will they kill another student? You very well could have a killer on campus.
Then,
I overheard a gentleman talking to someone on the phone
an anonymous student calls in with a tip.
about basically how he been inside the house and ended up shooting the kids.
My eyes, go to the back of my head. I can't believe it. This is crazy. It is going to be a student.
It's getting good now, Julius.
Julius and I both realized
The team finds surveillance video of the possible suspect.
The guy that we found on the video.
Identifies him as 19-year-old Joseph Ed.
Can you go with us and talk to us?
Sure, same. Yeah.
We narrowed down his timeline, talked to some people who were with him.
Do you remember talking to anybody on the phone?
I can show you my call history.
Yeah, if
sure,
you don't
go
mind.
ahead.
We determined that he wasn't on the phone during the time that the anonymous person had told us.
This is not our guy. We're gonna let him go. And ultimately, we were able to say definitively that whatever that anonymous tipster heard, he heard it mistakenly.
As the first 48 slips away,
At this point, we're no clearer on the motive or who could have done this than we were when we first got the case.
We have subpoenaed the phone company for records.
And let's get with Nintendo on trying to see if we can track that switch. I'm definitely not a video game whiz, but I've talked to my brother who is a computer IT guy, and he had suggested that if that Nintendo Switch got on Internet Anywhere, we could track down where the IP address was. But I feel like Detective Barton might have thought that I was crazy for suggesting it.
Okay.
11 days later,
This is the victim's phone records. At 11:25, the day when he's discovered, he makes a phone call.
We know that the person that was picking him up to take him to school was picking him up at about 12, which means he was alive sometime between 11:25 and 12, really making the window very narrow as far as when he was actually murdered. Everything I've looked into this guy's past, he has no enemies. Nobody wanted to kill him.
If this was just a random break-in and all they took was a switch, then we're dealing with some young kids. I went to bed most nights thinking, I don't know how I'm gonna solve it.
Hopefully I can catch a break, get something.
23 days after Matt's death,
Oh my God.
Barton hears back from Nintendo.
The switch registered on an IP address a week after he was murdered. I realized I'm gonna solve my case because I knew this was the break.
It was very difficult for the first few weeks after Matt's murder. Just walking down the hallways, thinking about, that he wasn't going to be in that office anymore. It was tough. Matt was a great friend and a much respected professor.
Very smart, real numbers person. He taught economics and game theory.
Who can give me a definition of game theory?
You go for it?
I don't want to go. I don't know.
It's like, if I make a decision, how are my competitors going to react? And then the more players that are involved, the more complex the strategies and the interactions become. Students just loved him. And he cared a lot about the students, you could tell.
We were both sports fans. We talked about South Alabama sports. During baseball season, Matt used to come to a lot of games with us.
The first baseball season without Matt, we took his picture that was from the memorial and we framed it. And so he's out on the deck with us for every baseball game that we attend. It's like a beautiful evening for baseball.
Three weeks into the investigation.
Game theory is very interesting when you're an investigator trying to get one up on your opponent, knowing if he does this, how his opponent might react and how he can play off of that. And the Nintendo Switch was one of the coolest springboards to an investigation I've ever been a part of. It's like right in here by St. Louis.
Yeah.
When I was able to track the IP address from where that switch was powered on, then I was actually able to be given a physical location. I definitely want to hit it sooner rather than later. Obviously, we'll have the search warrant in hand. Hopefully, there'll be somebody in there.
We had never tracked down anything with a gaming system before, and it's something that we'll never forget.
Hey, there's a moving van on the other side. This made me think, okay, I'm on the right track. Clearly, they're trying to get out of Dodge. Hey, how we doing? Moving out, huh? Yeah. Come out of here for a sec. So we need to basically take a look around your apartment. Sure. And when I got in the apartment, I was so happy because I found a Nintendo Switch. I said, this is it. I just got to verify the serial number. I look in the back of the Switch, different serial number. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Where's the Switch?
But they still have some explaining to do as far as why did this Nintendo Switch join your network and who brought it to this location.
Hey. The day that I'm looking into, December 7th, I believe that was Saturday. Okay. Somebody would have came and they would have had a switch.
Tequez? You may have been.
Tequez? And last name?
Timmons.
Where does he stay?
I have no idea. 2 jobs away on the court.
Did Tequez tell you how he came in possession of this switch? I knew I got to figure out where I can find Tequez and how I can put Tequez involved in the professor's murder. This is him.
20-year-old Tyquez Timmons has no prior convictions. He used to work in construction and has 2 children.
The problem is, man, he don't really lay his head anywhere right now. Dude, we gotta find this Honda. Okay, Honda Accord, got it. But he just hasn't registered it yet.
To find Tyquez's address, Barton and Detective Nick Crepeau check with the dealer who sold him his Honda.
Hello there. Hello, hello. I used to sell cars before I was a police officer. And I know that a lot of car dealerships will put a GPS on the car so that if they have to repossess it, they know exactly where it is in real time.
I wonder how often that updates.
It's a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So anytime it stops, it's updating it. Yeah. So we freaking got anywhere this dude's gonna go, basically.
Yeah.
Dude, this system is incredible. Talk about the freaking jackpot, Nick. Not only were they able to provide me the location real time, but they were also able to give me the historical information of where that car was in the past.
So on the 20th, hit check locations.
Well, snap. At 11:50, he's at Gaylord Drive. This was huge. This meant that Tyquez Timmons was in a vehicle that was on the same street around the same time of when he was murdered.
But the GPS on the car only showed him to be in front of the residence for approximately 4 minutes.
It's just not enough time.
It's highly unlikely that the person that did this was only there for 4 minutes and then left. So maybe he dropped off the person or was picking up the person that did it.
Where's he at right now? So this is the latest.
Tyquez's Honda is currently hitting at a residence about 5 miles west.
So we contacted our tactical intelligence unit to do some surveillance, try to see if they could put eyes on the vehicle. And then if they can verify he's there, we can move in and take him down.
Backup lights are on and it's moving.
The car takes off from the house.
You got the vehicle stopped. Driver, me and the detainer. Give me advice if the target is in the vehicle.
To my surprise, we discovered that the driver was not Tyquez Timmons, but a Curtis Womack. I said, we need that driver transported at headquarters. He may be involved for all we know.
I gotta go be at the house then.
Barton and the team circle back to where the car had been parked.
There's always risks when you're approaching the unknown. We're in our tactical gear. We have our guns drawn. If he shot one person, he can certainly shoot at you. Tyquez came peacefully. He didn't say a word. So did you look up this Curtis Womack, Gillespie?
The driver of the car, 23-year-old Curtis Womack Jr., has no prior convictions. He's Tyquez's half-brother.
I think we need to talk to Curtis first.
We interview somebody else first because we want to make sure we know as much as we can before we go and confront the person that we believe holds all the answers.
We're investigating a homicide, and we know that Tyquez is connected to the homicide. Okay?
I don't know anything. If my little brother did something, he would have told me about it.
We have a lot of information that your brother, all right, is involved in this.
You're the wrong person.
The way he was responding to our questions, his overall callous demeanor made me feel like he knew more.
Wow. I'm done talking.
Okay, we're done.
Go ahead and start talking to this.
When I went to interview Tequez Timmons, the strategy was overwhelm him with evidence that he cannot just explain away. Do you have any idea why we'd want to talk to you?
For me, I heard that I was supposed to tell y'all that it was somebody about a Nintendo Switch.
Okay.
I bought the game, so I sold it to try to make a little extra money.
And where'd you get it?
At the Cirque on Overlooking University. Dude walked up to me. Hey, I got such and such. Gave him $75 for it.
I was feeding off of his responses and seeing how I can eventually prove to him that he's lying. Here's the thing. We know that you didn't buy the Switch from the Circle K. We know that, okay? Your car and your GPS is outside of where a homicide occurred. Do you understand? At the time a homicide occurred.
So you saying it was a homicide?
Yes.
So what was going on that led you to be on that street?
We were maneuvering the interview so you can confront them in that lie and they realize that you have the upper hand.
But just so happened, you had the Nintendo Switch that belonged to the guy that got killed.
Oh, anyways.
Did you pick anybody up?
No, sir.
You've got to understand that you very well might get charged with murder. If you're not the one that pulled the trigger, there's no reason why you should take this for whoever it is.
Yeah, I don't have nothing more to say.
At that point, our evidence is very thin. We don't really have all the pieces to that puzzle.
I really don't think he shot him. And I don't know why he's covering for him so much. He received a phone call, then we'd be able to track that phone number.
This is a cell phone.
Yeah. At 11:30, he gets the call. That person talks to him for about a minute. I was able to see who he was receiving calls from around the time the professor was killed was his brother, Curtis Womack.
Tequez wants to protect his brother.
That's it. That's gotta be it, dude. Freaking bro calls and says, dude, I messed up, man. You look back and you just kind of see the pieces falling into place. All right, Tequez. These are your phone records. Your brother's calling you at 11:30. He continues to call you all the way up until right when you pass the house where the murder happened. And then all the calls stop. I've done this long enough to know that you've got to tap into people's emotional state. Whether it's your brother or not, man, it's not worth going to jail for murder over it. It's not.
Only when you arrested.
I mean, that depends, man. Got to start with the truth.
They're brothers. They're gonna naturally look out for each other and not tell on the other one. But he's got to realize that he needs to look out for himself here.
You do not need to be wrapped up in this. You don't.
Don't want to be.
I know you don't want to be, but you have an opportunity. He said, I didn't shoot him, but I'll tell you who did.
Write it down.
Sure. And he wrote down the name Derek Scott.
He said he was trying to make some money.
Tyquez says he dropped off Derek across the street from the victim's house.
I guess he broke into the guy's house?
Yeah.
How did you know to pick him up?
He called me.
So what did he tell you happened when you picked him up?
He just said he went in the house. And the dude came out the room. And he shot him.
I definitely felt that we were just a couple pieces away from putting this picture completely together. Did you see him with a gun when he came back?
Well,
I knew that he was telling me the truth because nobody knew what weapon was used in the murder except the police. Well, why is your brother calling you? Your brother calls you several times within that time frame.
Didn't know what function. Probably just checking him.
Did you tell him about it?
I told him. Derek said he shot someone.
You just give me a quick second, all right?
There was probably no greater feeling to know that we finally got pretty much a full confession.
I don't know how that just happened, but I'll take it. I think if I ever had a conversation with Professor Weiser, he would probably agree that I used some game theory, whether knowingly or unknowingly, to help solve his case. This is him.
20-year-old Derek Scott has no prior convictions. He went to school with Tyquez. An hour later,
Derek, come up with your hands up. Let me see your hands.
Derek is taken into custody.
We want him to tell us his side of the story to see if there's any differences between what Tyquez has told us.
We talked to Tyquez. Told the whole story about what happened. Okay?
I mean, I don't know what y'all talking about. Like, I just don't.
That's your phone number right there. You were with Tyquez after he picked you up.
Hell no. I don't know what y'all talking about. Nah, y'all tripping.
I was definitely frustrated because I really wanted to bring this thing to an end. We have no murder weapon, no DNA, no eyewitness. I really didn't have those building blocks to making a good case to be presented at trial.
That goes for Derek and Tyquez. It would be even harder to press charges on Tyquez's brother, Curtis.
But at that point, I presented all the evidence to the DA's office.
There's lots of communication between the case detective and the district attorney's office, and it was an important case to me because Professor Weiser was horribly murdered in the sanctity of his own home. This case rocked our community.
Wow. She said we can charge them both with felony murder.
24 days after Professor Matthew Weiser was killed, Derek Scott and Tyquez Timmons are taken to jail.
This was a pretty high-profile case because of who the victim was. I think it was very scary for the public because it could have been anyone. It being a high-profile case, there's pressure when the media is involved and people are looking and people want answers, but it's risky anytime you take anything to trial.
Jurors in this day and age want eyewitness testimony. They want that rock-solid evidence, and we didn't have that in this case. And this was not an easy case, okay? This was not an easy case.
After the arrest is made, eventually Derek and Tyquez are let out on bond on electronic monitoring. There's no worse feeling than to have to let them walk out those doors. There's always a chance that they might try to tamper with evidence that we don't have at this point. It was very alarming and concerning just because we're still investigating Curtis Womack.
I don't know anything. If my little brother did something, he would have told me about it.
It was a matter of what can I build to possibly connect Curtis to this crime as well.
We conducted a search warrant on Curtis's vehicle at the police impound yard. This is the crowbar that was found in Curtis Womack's vehicle. It had what appeared to be some paint chips or residue on it.
That felt pretty significant, especially since we knew that the professor's back door had been pried open.
Detective Barton then submitted that crowbar to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. They're able to tell that the marks that were found on the door at the victim's house were created by this crowbar. Getting that information was huge.
The crowbar was just the little extra push that we needed to be able to make the arrest on Curtis.
Eight months later, all three suspects are indicted by a grand jury.
This is Madison Davis with the Mobile County District Attorney's Office. We had to be very strategic in the prosecution because every step that we took would affect what the other co-defendants may do. And I think that it's ironic that his case was a case where game theory did come into play so much.
ADA Davis's first move is to decide which defendant to try first.
The only person that confessed to the crime was the driver, Tequez Timmons. So the strongest case is against the man that did not enter the residence and did not pull the trigger.
But if we tried Tequez first and got a murder conviction on him, he has no incentive to testify against the other ones. And that's why it was so important to be able to try Derek Scott's case first. I believe that he was the most culpable in all of this. I believe that he's the one that pulled the trigger.
In preparation for Derek's trial,
These are some of the call logs from Tequez Timmons from the 20th of November of 2019. I went through every single piece of evidence in that file to really be able to evaluate the strength of the case. You can see that the activity on the phone picks up drastically after the time that the murder was committed. And Derek's connecting to this tower right here, which is right next to the crime scene.
But the defense would say, so his phone puts him in the area. Did you find his DNA? Did you find his fingerprints? How can you prove that my client is in fact the one that shot the professor outside of what his co-defendant, Tequez Timmons, has said he did?
You have to be able to look at your case realistically with what the likelihood of a conviction is if you put it in front of a jury. So based on the evidence that we had, I thought the prudent thing to do was to extend some sort of plea offer.
It's not a decision that anyone takes lightly because we all want the harshest possible sentence. It's difficult to do plea bargains, but sometimes they're necessary.
I told Derek's attorney pretty frankly that this is my bottom line. He was the shooter in this case, and because of that, I'm offering a 20-year sentence. And this is not negotiable.
Almost 2 years after Matthew Weiser was killed, Derek Scott pleads guilty to felony murder.
Having the shooter accept responsibility and enter a guilty plea was big. But we still have Tequez and we have Curtis Womack. So the next person in our priority list on prosecution was going to be Curtis.
But when ADA Davis tries to settle his case out of court,
they informed me that he was not interested in taking any offer, that he wanted a trial. It's never a great thing when a defense attorney is saying, no, we want to go to trial. That's definitely a red flag that there's some weaknesses in your case.
You have to think the defense's story will be, how do you know that it wasn't Tequez that dropped the pry bar into the trunk? How can you prove it wasn't just Tequez who murdered the professor? He's the only one with the switch. He's the only one with the GPS on the car.
We just really have Curtis with a crowbar in his trunk. And while that is really good circumstantial evidence, it is 100% up to that jury what they want to do with it. I knew the importance to get Tyquez on board to testify against his brother, Curtis. I had to have that for trial. I had to. Without Tyquez's statement, Curtis could walk out the front door at the end of it.
Tyquez Timmons did not have a record. He was not the one that pulled the trigger.
So I had a very frank conversation with Tyquez's attorney. I told him that for those reasons, I'm willing to work with him. But I would need Tyquez to tell the truth.
5 months before Curtis's trial.
Detective Glenn Barton with the homicide unit is here. Everybody, we can state our name.
Tyquez Timmons. Chase Dearman, counsel for Tyquez Timmons.
And Assistant District Attorney Madison Davis.
This is the recording when he came in and told us that he was wanting to be cooperative and tell the whole truth about what happened.
Derek called me and said that he needed a ride. He was in panic. As I left home, I was going back trying to get to where he was.
When he didn't implicate Curtis, I knew that he wasn't being 100% truthful with me.
I believe that your brother has probably reached out to you in some way, and that this is your way to basically make him as little as involved as possible.
You said you have evidence of me talking to my brother?
You could tell that he was withholding information. Wouldn't make eye contact, just very evasive.
Madison, I hate to waste your time like this, but this was not what I anticipated happening.
I told him that if we want this to work, you are going to have to tell the truth, no matter how hard it is. Otherwise, we'd be forced to go to trial.
I think I need to meet with Mr. Timmons. We all step up 1 second.
10 minutes later, Tyquez and his attorney return.
It was very emotional for Tyquez. He was crying, he was upset. He knew what it was we were asking him to do, and he didn't want to do it.
I do believe Mr. Timmons has more to tell you.
November 20th, 2019. I was with my brother and Derek Scott. And so I dropped him off in that neighborhood.
Don't use pronouns. Who did you drop off?
I dropped off Curtis and Derek Scott.
It was hard to see someone have to turn on the brother.
So you did hear them say, them being Curtis and Derek, that they went either through a back door or a window?
Yeah, I think it was back door. And they said when he went in the house and the guy opened the door and Derek shot him.
You could tell that it was something that he had been hiding and struggling with for a long time. And I think when he finally just said the name, it was almost therapeutic for him to just get it out.
December 2021, ADA Davis offers Tyquez a plea deal.
We will amend the charge to a burglary charge if Tyquez agrees to testify against Curtis.
Tyquez consents.
So at that point in time, the tables had turned as to who had the leverage in the case against Curtis. And so I made an offer for him, for Curtis to plead to a manslaughter charge. But it's never a done deal until the paperwork is signed.
3 months pass, and as the first day of Curtis Womack's trial begins,
Curtis decided it was in his best interest to enter a guilty plea.
I was so happy because all 3 of the defendants participated in killing Professor Weiser were held accountable. I remember Matthew Weiser's father telling me, "Detective, I understand you're going to do everything you can to solve my son's murder, but I don't think you're gonna. It's just too random." So it meant the world to me to be able to give him that closure.
All right. We think of Matt a lot. We miss having Matt out with us. Makes you feel good that his picture is always with us out at the baseball games.
Yeah, how's it
Hey,
going?
Good, good.
See ya.
All right.
Matt.
Thank you. All right, Matt, bring us luck. It's kind of an obligation we have to Matt to share some stories about him. There you go, buddy. All right.
Good job.
There's people that started coming after Matt's been gone, and they always ask, what's the deal with the picture? And then we get to share his story and tell them a little bit about Matt, and more people get to understand who he was and what he was about.
Within 6 months, there became a discussion of what can we do to honor Matt's passing. So Al and myself and a few others said, let's try to put together a scholarship. Now, it's an endowed scholarship with about $50,000.
There we go. Makes you feel good that we can recognize Matt every year, and students will benefit forever from his memory. So it's a big deal.
The file had been sitting in the darkness for more than 4 decades, buried beneath thousands of forgotten reports, hidden inside a dusty evidence archive, a name written on a faded folder that most detectives walking through the department halls had never heard before. But inside that old police file was something that would change everything. A single photograph, a handwritten note, and a detail investigators had somehow missed since 1984. For 40 years, the town of Greyhaven, Maine, carried a question nobody could answer. What really happened on that cold October night when 27-year-old Emily Carter disappeared without leaving a trace? At first, authorities believed she had simply vanished. A missing person. Another case that would eventually fade away. Another name added to the endless list of unsolved mysteries across America. But Emily Carter's disappearance was different, because the evidence suggested she did not leave willingly, and someone knew exactly how to erase every sign that she had ever been there. October 17th, 1984. The small coastal community of Greyhaven was preparing for the arrival of winter. The fishing boats were already returning earlier in the evening. The streets were quieter. The ocean winds cut through the narrow roads surrounding the old neighborhoods. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A place where people locked their doors, but rarely worried about what was happening behind the windows next door. Emily Carter had lived there her entire life. She was known as someone dependable, someone who showed up when she said she would. Friends described her as organized, careful, and impossible to imagine simply disappearing. She worked at a local medical supply company. She volunteered at a community center on weekends. She had a small apartment above an old bookstore downtown. Nothing about her life suggested she was planning to run away. Nothing suggested she wanted to disappear. But on that October night, Emily vanished. The last confirmed sighting came at 8:42 p.m. A neighbor saw her walking toward her apartment after finishing a late shift. She carried a brown leather bag. She wore a dark blue coat. She waved. A normal moment. A moment nobody realized would become the final image anyone would ever have of her. The next morning, Emily never arrived at work. Her supervisor called her apartment. No answer. At first, nobody panicked. People assumed she was sick, maybe exhausted. Maybe her car had broken down. But as the hours passed, something began to feel wrong. Emily never missed work. Never disappeared without telling someone. By noon, her friends were calling hospitals. By evening, police officers were standing outside her apartment door. And when investigators stepped inside, they found a scene that created more questions than answers. The apartment looked normal. Too normal. Her keys were sitting on the kitchen counter. Her purse was inside. Her wallet was untouched. Her favorite coffee mug was still beside the sink. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. There was no obvious sign of a struggle. But investigators noticed something strange. Emily's coat was gone. The same coat witnesses saw her wearing the night before. And beside the front door was a small mark. A tiny scratch on the wooden frame. Almost invisible. Almost meaningless. At the time, detectives ignored it. They believed it was just another detail in an apartment that had seen years of use. They did not know that 40 years later, that tiny mark would become one of the most important clues in the entire case. The initial investigation moved quickly. Officers interviewed neighbors, friends, co-workers, anyone who might have seen Emily before she disappeared. But every conversation created more confusion. One neighbor claimed they heard a car leaving the area around 10 p.m. Another said they saw a figure standing near Emily's building. But nobody could identify who it was. No license plate. No description. No clear timeline. The investigation began to slow. Then it stopped. Within months, Emily Carter became another cold case. A photograph on a missing person board. A name in a filing cabinet. A memory that slowly disappeared from public attention. But Emily's family never stopped searching. Her mother, Linda Carter, kept Emily's bedroom exactly the same. The books remained on the shelf. The clothes stayed inside the closet. The calendar on the wall still showed October 1984. A frozen moment in time. Linda believed her daughter was still out there somewhere. She believed someone knew the truth. And she was right, because hidden inside the original police investigation was a detail that nobody noticed. A piece of evidence collected from Emily's apartment. A fingerprint. Not enough to identify anyone in 1984. Not enough to make an arrest. Just a small print lifted from the edge of a wooden surface near the front door. Detectives documented it, photographed it, placed it into evidence. Then they moved on. At the time, fingerprint technology was limited. There were no massive databases capable of instantly connecting unknown prints to individuals. A fingerprint without a match was often just another dead end. So the evidence was placed into storage. And forgotten. For decades. The years passed. The town changed. New buildings replaced old ones. New detectives replaced the officers who originally worked the case. Many people believed Emily Carter's disappearance would remain forever unsolved. Until one day in 2025, a retired investigator reviewing old files noticed something unusual. A folder that had been opened dozens of times. A case that had been discussed for years, but never truly examined with modern technology. The May 1984 cold case. The missing woman. The unanswered questions. And the fingerprint. The investigator requested the evidence be re-examined. At first, nobody expected anything. After 40 years, hope was almost impossible. But when forensic specialists scanned the old fingerprint and entered it into modern systems, something happened. A result appeared. A name. A connection. A match that sent investigators back to the beginning. Because the fingerprint did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone who had been connected to Emily Carter's life. Someone who had never been considered a suspect. Someone whose name had appeared in the original investigation, but had been overlooked. The discovery shocked detectives. Because suddenly, the case everyone thought was frozen in the past was alive again. And the old police file was revealing a horrifying truth. The answer had been there all along. Hidden in plain sight. Waiting for someone to look again. The fingerprint changed everything. For 40 years, investigators had believed Emily Carter's disappearance was a mystery buried beneath layers of forgotten evidence and unanswered questions. But now, one tiny mark on an old wooden surface had reopened a case that many thought would never move again. The May 1984 cold case was no longer just another unsolved file. It had a name attached to it. A person connected to the night Emily vanished. And when detectives looked deeper into the old records, they discovered something disturbing. The person behind the fingerprint had not been a random visitor. They had been inside Emily Carter's apartment. They had been close enough to leave behind a trace. And somehow, They had escaped suspicion for decades. The name connected to the fingerprint was Daniel Mercer. In 1984, Daniel was 31 years old. He lived less than 3 miles from Emily's apartment. He worked as a maintenance technician for several local businesses. At first glance, nothing about him seemed suspicious. No criminal history. No violent reputation. No record that would have immediately placed him under investigation. But the moment detectives pulled his name from the old files, they discovered something that had been forgotten. Daniel Mercer had been interviewed during the original investigation. He was not just a name found through technology. He was already part of the story. 40 years earlier, investigators had written his name in their reports. But they never followed the connection far enough. In October 1984, Daniel told police that he barely knew Emily. He claimed they had only spoken a few times because he occasionally repaired equipment at the medical supply company where she worked. A simple professional relationship. Nothing more. Detectives at the time accepted his statement. There was no evidence connecting him to Emily's disappearance. No witness. No physical evidence. No reason to believe he was involved. But the new investigation uncovered something hidden in the original notes. A detail that changed the entire picture. A detective's handwritten comment from 1984. One sentence written in the corner of an interview page. Subject appears nervous when asked about apartment. The note had never been included in official summaries. It had never appeared in news reports. It had simply remained inside the old file. Waiting. The new team began rebuilding the timeline from the beginning. They studied every witness statement, every phone record, every photograph, every piece of evidence collected from Emily's apartment. And slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Daniel Mercer hat lite. Not about everything. Just enough. Enough to avoid attention. Enough to disappear into the background. Investigators discovered that Daniel had told police he had never been near Emily's apartment building the week she vanished. But old maintenance records showed something different. 3 days before Emily disappeared, Daniel had been called to repair a broken heating unit in the same building. He had been there. He had access. He knew the layout. And more importantly, he knew the building's weaknesses. The investigators looked again at the small scratch near Emily's front door. The same scratch that had been dismissed decades earlier. Modern forensic analysis suggested it was not random damage. It appeared consistent with forced entry. A door that had been opened without a key. A door someone did not want to damage too much. A person trying to get inside quietly. The discovery changed the entire theory of the case. Emily Carter may not have vanished from outside her home. She may have disappeared from inside it. The apartment had never been a peaceful scene. It had been a controlled scene. A place where someone had taken the time to remove evidence. To create the appearance that nothing happened. And now detectives had to ask the question nobody wanted to ask. How long had Daniel Mercer been hiding the truth? The investigation expanded. Detectives searched old employment records, property documents, archived interviews. They contacted people who had known Daniel in the 1980s. Many remembered him as quiet, private, someone who kept to himself. But several former co-workers described something else. A different side. They said Daniel became angry when questioned. They said he disliked being challenged. They said he had a habit of watching people without speaking. One former co-worker gave investigators a statement that immediately caught their attention. She remembered Daniel mentioning Emily after her disappearance. Not because he was concerned. Not because he wanted to help. But because he seemed to know details that had never been released publicly. Details about her apartment. Details about the investigation. Details that only someone close to the case would know. In 1984, nobody noticed. The town was focused on finding Emily. The media was demanding answers. The police department was under pressure. Small details disappeared beneath the weight of a massive investigation. But decades later, those details returned. And they pointed in one direction. Daniel Mercer. However, investigators still faced a major problem. A fingerprint from 40 years ago was powerful. But it was not enough. They needed more. They needed to prove what happened. They needed to understand what occurred inside Emily Carter's apartment that night. And then they found something else. Something hidden in the evidence archive. A box that had not been opened in years. Inside were photographs taken during the original investigation. Most were ordinary. The apartment. The furniture. The belongings left behind. But one photograph stopped investigators immediately. It showed the area near Emily's bedroom. And in the corner of the image was something nobody had ever mentioned. A small piece of fabric. Almost impossible to see. A dark thread caught beneath the edge of the carpet. The original detectives had photographed it. But they never collected it. They never tested it. They never knew what it could reveal. Modern investigators sent the photograph for enhancement. The image became clearer. The fabric appeared to come from a specific type of material. A material commonly used in work jackets during the 1980s. The same type of jacket Daniel Mercer wore according to photographs from that period. Suddenly, the old apartment was speaking. Every forgotten clue. Every overlooked detail. Every unanswered question. They were all coming back. The case that had been silent for 4 decades was beginning to tell its story. But the most shocking discovery was still waiting. Because when investigators examined Daniel Mercer's life after 1984, they found something even more disturbing. He had not simply moved on. He had changed his identity. He had left Maine. And he had taken the secrets of Greyhaven with him. For years, nobody knew where he went. Until detectives discovered his current location. And realized the person connected to Emily Carter's disappearance had been living quietly under the radar. Less than a day away. Still alive. Still carrying the answers. And for the first time in 40 years, investigators were preparing to confront the man whose fingerprint had reopened one of Maine's darkest mysteries. Because the question was no longer whether Daniel Mercer had been connected to Emily Carter. The question was much worse. What did he do that night in October 1984? And why had he spent 40 years making sure nobody found out? The moment detectives located Daniel Mercer, the entire investigation changed direction. For 4 decades, his name had existed only as a forgotten line inside an old police report. A man interviewed once. A man cleared quickly. A man nobody thought about again. But now, modern investigators were looking at him differently. Not as a witness. Not as a background figure. But as the last known person connected to the evidence left behind in Emily Carter's apartment. The search for Daniel Mercer took investigators across state lines. After leaving Maine in the late 1980s, Daniel had built a completely different life. He changed jobs, moved between several states, avoided attention, never spoke publicly about Emily Carter, never mentioned the disappearance that had once shaken an entire community. To his neighbors, he was simply Daniel, a quiet man, a man who kept his distance, someone who lived a normal life. But investigators knew something the people around him did not. Normal lives can hide old secrets. And some secrets survive for decades. When detectives finally found Daniel Mercer, they expected resistance. They expected anger. They expected someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Instead, they found something unexpected. Calm. Almost too much calm. When investigators approached him and mentioned Emily Carter's name, witnesses later described his reaction as unusual. Not confusion. Not surprise. Recognition. As if he had been waiting for the past to return, Daniel agreed to speak with detectives. At first, he denied everything. He said the fingerprint match was impossible. He claimed he had no reason to be inside Emily's apartment. He insisted the original investigation had already cleared him. But detectives came prepared. They placed the old evidence photographs on the table. They showed him the fingerprint report. They showed him the timeline. And then they asked one question. Why was your fingerprint inside her apartment? The room went silent. According to investigators, Daniel stared at the evidence for several seconds. Then he looked away. A small reaction. Almost nothing. But after decades of investigating criminal cases, detectives knew small reactions mattered. The interview continued. Daniel claimed he had visited Emily's apartment once. A statement that contradicted what he told police in 1984. Back then, he said he had never been inside. Now he admitted he had. He changed his story. But only after the evidence forced him to. Investigators pushed further. When exactly had he been there? Why did his fingerprint remain near the front door? Why did he fail to mention the visit during the original investigation? Daniel had answers. But every answer created another question. He claimed Emily had asked him to repair something in her apartment. A simple maintenance issue. Nothing unusual. But investigators checked the records. There was no service request. No company paperwork. No official reason for him to be there. Another inconsistency. Another crack in a story built over 40 years. Then came the detail that shocked investigators. Daniel knew something about Emily's apartment that he should not have known. He described the location of furniture, the arrangement of rooms, the condition of the building. Small details that suggested familiarity. Too much familiarity. The detectives realized something terrifying. Daniel was not describing a place he had briefly visited. He was describing a place he remembered. A place he had studied. A place connected to a night nobody could explain. The investigation moved into a new phase. Authorities began re-examining every person connected to Emily's life. They looked at friends, co-workers, neighbors, anyone who had been part of her world. But the evidence kept leading back to Daniel Mercer. The fingerprint, the changing statements, the forgotten interview note, the unexplained knowledge. Everything pointed toward one possibility. Daniel had been hiding something. The question was what? Because even with new evidence, detectives still did not know exactly what happened on October 17, 1984. Emily's body had never been found. There was no confession, no weapon, no eyewitness account of the disappearance. The case remained incomplete. And that was the biggest challenge. Finding the truth was one thing. Proving it was another. Investigators began searching for more evidence from the past. They returned to Greyhaven. The town had changed dramatically since 1984. Many buildings were gone. Old streets had been redesigned. People who remembered Emily were older now. Some had passed away. Some had forgotten details. But a few still remembered that night. And one witness came forward with a memory that had haunted them for 40 years. A former neighbor named Margaret Ellis. In 1984, Margaret lived across from Emily's apartment. She told police back then that she heard something unusual. A sound. A brief argument. But at the time, she was not sure. She never wanted to accuse someone without proof. So she stayed silent. For decades. When detectives returned in 2025, Margaret finally told them what she remembered. Around 9:15 p.m. on the night Emily disappeared, she heard Emily's voice. Not a conversation. Not a normal discussion. A raised voice. A moment of tension. Then another voice. A man. She could not identify him, but she remembered one strange detail. The man sounded familiar. Someone who belonged there. Someone Emily knew. That statement changed the timeline, because investigators had always believed Emily disappeared shortly after leaving work. But Margaret's memory suggested something else. Emily had been alive inside her apartment later that night, and someone had been with her. The case was becoming clearer, but also darker. Because if Margaret's memory was accurate, then the person responsible was not a stranger who followed Emily home. It was someone she trusted enough to let inside. Someone who knew her. Someone who had access. Someone who had no problem waiting 40 years for the world to forget. Detectives returned to Daniel Mercer. They searched his background again. This time, they looked beyond Maine. They examined his movements after 1984. And they found something disturbing. A pattern. A series of unexplained disappearances and suspicious incidents connected to places where Daniel had lived. Nothing strong enough for an arrest. Nothing that could prove involvement. But enough to raise serious questions. Enough to suggest Emily Carter's case might not have been the only secret Daniel Mercer carried. The investigation was no longer about a missing woman from 1984. It was about discovering how many unanswered questions followed one man through his entire life. And then, investigators found the clue they had been searching for. A piece of evidence that had never been connected to Daniel. Something recovered from Emily's apartment. Something that could finally reveal what happened inside those walls. The old evidence box contained one final item. A handwritten note. A note that had been overlooked for decades. And the words written on that paper would force detectives to reconsider everything they believed about the night Emily Carter disappeared. Because the truth had not been completely buried. It had been waiting. Hidden inside the same file that started it all. And now, after 40 years of silence, the final pieces of the mystery were beginning to surface. The handwritten note was only 3 lines long. 3 lines buried inside a forgotten evidence box. 3 lines that had survived 4 decades of silence. But when investigators read those words, they realized they were looking at something that could completely change the direction of the case. Because the note was not written by a detective. It was not written by a witness. It was written by someone who had been inside Emily Carter's apartment after she disappeared. And the message raised a terrifying question. Who else had been there? The note had been found attached to an old evidence photograph. A small piece of paper folded behind the image. A detail missed during the original investigation. The handwriting was difficult to read. The ink had faded. But forensic specialists were able to restore the words. Check the door again. Something was missed. That was it. Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. No date. Just a warning. A warning that suggested someone knew the original investigation had overlooked something important. The detectives who reviewed the file were stunned, because the note appeared to have been written by someone connected to the investigation itself. Someone who saw something. Someone who knew there was more to Emily Carter's disappearance than what appeared in the official reports. The first question was obvious. Who wrote it? Investigators searched through old department records. They compared handwriting samples from every officer involved in 1984. And after weeks of analysis, they found a possible match. The handwriting belonged to Detective Thomas Reed, one of the original investigators assigned to Emily's disappearance. But there was a problem. Detective Reed had died years earlier. He was never able to explain the note, never able to reveal why he wrote it, never able to say what he believed had been missed. His family had no idea. His former colleagues had no memory of it. The note had disappeared into the evidence system. Forgotten. Until now, investigators began examining Detective Reed's original casework. They discovered something unusual. Although the official reports described the investigation as inconclusive, Reed privately believed Emily's apartment was not the scene of a voluntary disappearance. His personal notes suggested he suspected someone close to Emily. Someone who had access. Someone who knew how to avoid leaving obvious evidence. But Reed never had enough proof. And without proof, the case slowly collapsed. The new investigators now understood why. The original detective had seen the same things they were seeing. He just did not have the technology to prove it. The fingerprint. The damaged door frame. The witness who heard an argument. The hidden note. All of these details had existed since 1984. They were not new clues. They were old clues finally being understood. The investigation returned to Emily's apartment. The building no longer existed. It had been demolished years earlier. But investigators used old photographs and architectural records to recreate the layout. They studied every angle, every entrance, every possible movement. And then they noticed something. The location of the fingerprint was important. It was not near a random object. It was on the inside edge of the doorway, a place someone would touch while opening the door from inside, meaning Daniel Mercer was likely not simply entering the apartment. He may have been leaving. That discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, because it changed the entire timeline. If Daniel's fingerprint was created while leaving Emily's apartment, then his original statement was not just incomplete. It was a lie. A lie that lasted 40 years. Detectives confronted Daniel again. This time, they brought the new findings. They asked him about the fingerprint location. They asked about the hidden note. They asked about Margaret Ellis hearing an argument. Daniel remained calm. Too calm. He repeated the same explanation. He said he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. He said he cared about her. Then detectives asked something unexpected. Why did you never report visiting her apartment? For the first time, Daniel hesitated. Only briefly. But enough. He had no answer. The interview ended without a confession, without an arrest. But investigators walked away believing they were closer than ever. Because Daniel Mercer was no longer just a person of interest. He was the center of the mystery. The investigation expanded again. Authorities searched for anything connected to Daniel's life after 1984. Old residences. Storage units. Employment records. They wanted to know whether Daniel had kept anything from that night. Anything that could reveal what happened to Emily. And then, hidden inside an abandoned storage facility, investigators discovered another shocking piece of evidence. A box belonging to Daniel Mercer. The storage unit had been rented under his name decades earlier. Inside were ordinary items. Old photographs. Documents. Personal belongings. Nothing unusual. Until investigators found an envelope. Inside the envelope was a newspaper clipping. The headline was from 1984. Local woman vanishes without trace. It was an article about Emily Carter. But that was not what shocked investigators. The newspaper clipping had been folded carefully. Stored separately. Protected. Like something important. Like something someone wanted to keep. There was also a photograph. A photograph of Emily. Not from the newspaper. A personal photograph. One that had never been released publicly. Investigators immediately questioned how Daniel had obtained it. Because the photograph was taken inside Emily's apartment. A private photograph. One that only someone close to her would likely have. The discovery changed the case again. Daniel had always claimed he barely knew Emily. But his possessions suggested otherwise. He had kept a photograph of her for 40 years. He had hidden it away. And he had never explained why. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. But investigators still faced the same problem. They had connections. They had suspicious behavior. They had lies. But they needed the final piece. The one thing that could reveal exactly what happened that night. Then came another breakthrough. A former employee from the medical supply company contacted police. Someone who had never been interviewed in the original investigation. Someone who had carried a secret for decades. He claimed that shortly before Emily disappeared, she told him something strange. Something about Daniel Mercer. Something that made her uncomfortable. A warning she never shared with police. A conversation nobody knew existed. And when investigators heard what Emily had said, they realized the answer to the entire mystery might have been hidden just days before she vanished. Because Emily Carter had noticed something. She had discovered something. And she may have been preparing to expose the truth. The same truth that someone had spent 40 years trying to bury. For 40 years, the people of Greyhaven believed Emily Carter disappeared without warning. A normal woman. A normal life. A normal night that somehow ended with a mystery nobody could solve. But the new investigation revealed something much darker. Emily had not been unaware of danger. She had noticed something. She had felt something was wrong. And days before she vanished, she may have told someone exactly who she feared. The former employee who contacted investigators was named Robert Hayes. In 1984, Robert worked with Emily at the medical supply company. He was not a close friend. Not someone investigators would have immediately considered important. He was simply a coworker. Someone who watched from the background. Someone who remembered small details others forgot. When detectives interviewed Robert decades later, he appeared nervous. Not because he was hiding involvement, but because he had spent 40 years wondering if staying silent had allowed something terrible to happen. Robert told investigators about a conversation with Emily that happened 4 days before her disappearance. It was late afternoon. Most employees had already left. Emily stayed behind to finish paperwork. Robert noticed she looked distracted. Not tired. Not stressed from work. Worried. He asked if everything was okay. At first, Emily said nothing. Then she mentioned Daniel Mercer, a name that had already appeared in the investigation. She told Robert that Daniel had been acting strangely, watching her, showing up unexpectedly, finding reasons to start conversations. At the time, Robert thought it was nothing serious, just an awkward situation. A person who was interested in someone who was not interested back. But Emily did not describe it that way. She told him something that stayed in his memory for decades. She said, "I think he knows more about me than he should." A simple sentence. But one that changed everything. Because investigators now knew Daniel had knowledge he should not have had. He knew details about Emily's apartment. He knew information about her schedule. He knew things that suggested he had been paying much closer attention than he admitted. Robert continued. He said Emily had planned to talk to someone about Daniel. She never said who. She never explained what she intended to report. But she was uncomfortable. And then, for days later, she disappeared. The timeline was becoming impossible to ignore. investigators began rebuilding the final week of Emily's life. Monday. She noticed Daniel appearing near her workplace. Tuesday. She mentioned feeling watched. Wednesday. She told Robert she might need help. Thursday. She vanished. Every detail connected. Every unanswered question became louder. The investigators now believed Emily's disappearance was not random. It was planned. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been waiting. And someone had known exactly how to make her disappear without leaving obvious evidence. But there was another problem. Daniel Mercer had an explanation for everything. When questioned about Emily's concerns, he denied them. He said Emily misunderstood his behavior. He claimed he was only trying to help her because he knew she was struggling. He said the rumors about him were unfair. And because there was no body, no confession, and no direct eyewitness, the case remained difficult. The investigators needed something stronger. Something physical. Something that could connect Daniel to what happened after Emily disappeared. So they returned to the evidence. The old apartment photographs. The fingerprint. The fabric fragment. The storage unit. And one item became the center of attention. The personal photograph of Emily found among Daniel's belongings. Forensic experts examined the image. They discovered something strange. The photograph had been taken shortly before Emily disappeared. But the camera that captured it was not the camera Emily owned. That meant someone else had taken it. Someone inside her apartment. Someone close enough to photograph her private life. The discovery created a chilling possibility. Daniel was not simply interested in Emily. He had been inside her world. Watching. Collecting memories. Keeping evidence of a connection he denied. Detectives searched deeper into Daniel's history. They discovered he had worked in multiple homes and buildings throughout his career. He had access to places where people trusted him. He understood security systems. Locks. Building layouts. He knew how to enter and leave spaces without attracting attention. The same skills that made him valuable as a maintenance worker also made investigators uncomfortable. Because Emily's apartment showed signs of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. No obvious destruction. No caotic struggle. No careless mistakes. Only small details. The kind of details left by someone confident. Someone who believed they had time. As detectives reviewed the original investigation, they discovered another mistake. A missing interview. Daniel had been questioned only once in 1984. For less than 30 minutes. He was never brought back. Never pressured. Never investigated further. The reason? Detectives at the time were overwhelmed. The department was handling multiple cases. Evidence was limited. Technology was primitive. And Daniel appeared cooperative. A mistake that would haunt investigators decades later. Because the person who may have held the answers had been standing right in front of them. Then another witness came forward. An elderly man named Walter Briggs. In 1984, Walter owned a small repair shop near Emily's apartment. He remembered seeing Daniel's vehicle parked nearby on the night Emily disappeared. He remembered because Daniel's truck had a distinctive feature. A large dent on the passenger side. Walter had seen it many times. But when police interviewed him in 1984, he never mentioned it. Why? Because nobody asked the right question. The original investigation focused on strangers. Possible kidnappers. Random criminals. They did not focus enough on people already connected to Emily. When detectives showed Walter photographs of vehicles from 1984, he immediately identified Daniel's truck. The timeline became even more suspicious. Daniel had said he was nowhere near Emily's apartment that night. But witnesses placed him there. The evidence was closing in. Slowly. Piece by piece. After 40 years, the wall built around the truth was beginning to crack. But then investigators discovered something that made the entire case even more disturbing. A hidden document from Daniel's past. A report that had never been connected to Emily Carter's disappearance. A report involving another woman. Another unexplained incident. And another moment where Daniel Mercer's name appeared. Suddenly, detectives realized they might not be investigating one isolated crime. They might be looking at a pattern that had existed for decades. A pattern hidden behind different cities. Different names. Different years. But always the same question. How many secrets had Daniel Mercer carried with him? And how many people had been left behind without answers? The old police file had already uncovered one horrifying truth. Emily Carter had not simply vanished. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been hiding. And now investigators were preparing to uncover what happened after Daniel left Greyhaven. Because the trail did not end in Maine. It continued. And the next discovery would reveal just how far the mystery really went. The discovery of Daniel Mercer's past transformed the investigation from a single disappearance into something far more disturbing. For decades, detectives believed Emily Carter's case was an isolated tragedy. One woman. One night. One unanswered question. But the deeper they searched, the more they realized Emily's disappearance was connected to a much larger shadow. A pattern. A trail of unanswered questions following Daniel Mercer from place to place. The first clue came from an old police report in Vermont, a document created nearly 10 years after Emily vanished. The report involved a woman named Sarah Whitmore. In 1993, Sarah was reported missing from a small town where Daniel had recently moved. At the time, investigators considered several possibilities: a voluntary disappearance, a personal crisis, a decision to leave. But Sarah's family never believed that explanation. Because Sarah had left behind everything. Her car. Her wallet. Her personal belongings. Just like Emily Carter. And once again, Daniel Mercer's name appeared. Not as a suspect. Not officially. Only as someone who had been questioned. Someone who was nearby. Someone who had information. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Investigators reopened the old report. They examined every detail. They studied the timeline. They looked at Daniel's movements. And they found something unsettling. Daniel had been one of the last people known to have spoken with Sarah before she disappeared. Just like Emily. Another woman. Another disappearance. Another moment where Daniel was close enough to the story, but somehow far enough away from suspicion. The investigators contacted Sarah Whitmore's family. They learned something important. Sarah had mentioned Daniel before she vanished. She told her sister that he made her uncomfortable. She said he asked too many questions. She said he appeared at places where she did not expect to see him. The same behavior Emily had described years earlier. The same pattern. The same warning signs. For detectives, the question became unavoidable. Was Daniel Mercer responsible for more than one disappearance? The problem was time. Time had protected him. Evidence disappeared. Memories faded. Witnesses aged. Records were lost. 40 years of silence created a wall that investigators had to break through piece by piece. But now they had something they did not have in 1984. Technology. Modern forensic methods. Digital databases. Advanced evidence analysis. And most importantly, a reason to look again. Back in Maine, investigators continued rebuilding Emily Carter's final hours. They created a minute-by-minute timeline. At 5:30 p.m., Emily left work. At 6:10 p.m., she stopped at a local grocery store. At 7:45 p.m., she arrived home. At 8:42 p.m., a neighbor saw her entering the building. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Margaret Ellis heard voices. A woman arguing. A man responding. Then silence. And somewhere between that moment and midnight, Emily disappeared. The question that haunted detectives was simple. What happened in those final hours? The apartment contained the answer. Somewhere. Hidden. Waiting. Investigators returned to the evidence room and examined every item again. The fingerprint. The fabric fragment. The photographs. The old notes. Then forensic specialists discovered something new. The fabric fragment collected from Emily's apartment was not just similar to Daniel's jacket. It matched a specific type of work jacket issued by the company where Daniel had worked in 1984. The discovery was not enough to prove guilt, but it was enough to strengthen the connection. Daniel had the opportunity. He had the access. He had the lies. And now he had physical evidence linking him to the scene. When detectives confronted Daniel about the fabric evidence, his response changed. For the first time, he appeared frustrated. He questioned the investigation. He accused police of searching for someone to blame. He said 40 years had passed and people were trying to rewrite history. But investigators noticed something. Daniel never asked about Emily. He never asked whether her family was okay. He never asked if she had been found. He focused only on himself. That detail stayed with detectives. Because people connected to missing persons cases often want answers. They want closure. Daniel wanted distance. The investigation continued. Authorities searched through Daniel's old residences. They found nothing immediately. No hidden evidence. No confession. No obvious proof. But then, inside a forgotten box from his previous home, investigators discovered a journal. A personal journal. Written over several years. Most entries were ordinary. Daily routines. Work. Travel. Small observations. But several pages contained references to people Daniel had met throughout his life. Names. Dates. Locations. And one entry caught investigators' attention. A date. October 17th, 1984. The exact day Emily disappeared. The entry was short. Only one sentence. Some doors should stay closed. Investigators froze. Was it a coincidence? A meaningless phrase? Or was it connected to Emily Carter? The problem was that Daniel's writing style was vague. He often wrote in short, mysterious sentences. He rarely explained what he meant. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The same day Emily vanished. The same day Daniel claimed he had no involvement. The same day a fingerprint was left inside her apartment. The journal became a major piece of the investigation. But it also created another problem. Because Daniel's lawyers argued the writing was meaningless. They said investigators were interpreting ordinary words as evidence. And legally, they were right. A suspicious sentence was not a confession. A strange coincidence was not proof. The case still needed something stronger. Something undeniable. Then investigators received a call from an unexpected source. A former police officer. Someone who had worked briefly on Emily's disappearance in 1984. His name was Frank Dawson. He was retired, living quietly. And he had carried a memory for 40 years. A memory he never shared. He told investigators that shortly after Emily disappeared, he discovered something unusual. Something that never made it into the official report. He found a receipt. A gas station receipt. From the night Emily vanished. The receipt showed Daniel Mercer purchased fuel less than 1 mile from Emily's apartment. At 10:03 p.m. The exact time Daniel claimed he was already home. The receipt had been placed in the evidence file. But somehow it was never followed up. Never investigated. Never connected. Another forgotten piece of the puzzle. Another mistake from the original case. The investigators now had a timeline. A fingerprint. A witness. A hidden note. A suspicious journal entry. And a receipt placing Daniel near the scene. After 40 years, the case that once had no direction was suddenly moving faster than anyone expected. But the biggest question remained. If Daniel Mercer was responsible, where was Emily Carter? Because without finding her, the final truth remained buried. And then investigators discovered something beneath the ground near an abandoned property connected to Daniel's past. Something that would force the entire investigation into its darkest chapter. Something that had been hidden since 1984. The abandoned property sat at the edge of a forgotten road. A place most people in town had stopped noticing years ago. The trees had grown taller. The wooden fence had collapsed. The old building on the land had become nothing more than a broken shell. For decades, nobody had a reason to look there. Until investigators connected one name to the property. Daniel Mercer. The moment detectives discovered the connection, the entire atmosphere surrounding the case changed. Because this was no longer just about old documents. No longer just about fingerprints and forgotten reports. This was a location. A place where something might have happened. A place where the final answer to Emily Carter's disappearance might have been hidden for 40 years. The property had belonged to Daniel's uncle in the early 1980s. According to records, Daniel spent time there before leaving Maine. He claimed he only visited occasionally. A place to escape. A place to work on old vehicles. Nothing more. But investigators discovered something unusual. After Emily disappeared, Daniel suddenly stopped visiting the property. Within months, he moved away. He left behind his old routines. His old friends. His old life. Almost as if he was running from something. The search began slowly. Investigators knew they could not rush. 40 years of weather and environmental changes had destroyed many possible clues. Anything buried in 1984 could have been damaged, moved, lost forever. But modern forensic teams approached the property differently than detectives could have in the past. They used ground scanning technology. They mapped the entire area. They examined places where the soil appeared different. And after several hours, something caught their attention. A section of ground behind the old workshop. A place where the soil composition did not match the surrounding area. A place where someone had disturbed the earth. Investigators marked the location. The excavation began. And as the first layers of soil were removed, everyone involved understood the weight of that moment. Because after 40 years, they might finally know what happened to Emily Carter. The first discovery was not a body. It was something else. A small metal object. Rust-covered. Almost destroyed. But still recognizable. A key. Not an ordinary key. A key attached to a small blue tag. The same color as the keychain Emily's mother had described in the original missing person report. The discovery immediately sent investigators back to the old files. They reviewed photographs of Emily's belongings. Her apartment. Her personal items. And there it was. A photograph showing the same style of keychain. A detail that had never been considered important. Until now. More items were discovered. A piece of fabric. A damaged watch. A small personal object that investigators believed belonged to Emily. The evidence was carefully collected. Every item was documented. Every fragment was preserved. And then came the discovery that changed everything. A human bone fragment. The search area became a crime scene instantly. The entire property was secured. No one entered. No one left. The quiet land that had been ignored for decades became the center of one of Maine's biggest cold case investigations. The news spread quickly. Greyhaven was shocked. People who had grown old wondering what happened to Emily suddenly found themselves facing the possibility that the answer had been nearby all along. Families watched the investigation unfold. Former neighbors gathered outside the police perimeter. Some cried. Some refused to believe it. Because finding answers after 40 years brings its own kind of pain. For Emily's family, hope and fear existed together. They had spent decades waiting for a phone call. Waiting for someone to say Emily had been found. But nobody imagined that moment would come like this. Not with celebration. Not with relief. But with investigators carefully searching the ground. The forensic examination took weeks. The remains were analyzed. The evidence was compared. And finally, investigators received confirmation. The remains belonged to Emily Carter, the missing woman from 1984. The woman whose name had remained on a cold case file for 40 years. The woman whose disappearance had haunted Greyhaven. She had been found. But the discovery created even more questions. Because finding Emily answered only one mystery. It did not explain what happened. It did not explain why. And it did not explain how Daniel Mercer managed to hide the truth for so long. Investigators returned to the timeline. They studied Daniel's movements. They examined every conversation. Every document, every piece of evidence, and they found something disturbing about the abandoned property. The location was not random. It was carefully chosen. The area was isolated, hidden from the road, far enough away that nobody would notice unusual activity. Someone who knew the property could move without being seen. Someone like Daniel. The investigators now believed the same person who entered Emily's apartment had later used this location to hide the evidence. The case that began with a fingerprint had now become a murder investigation. And Daniel Mercer was no longer simply connected. He was the primary suspect. Authorities prepared to arrest him. But before they could, they needed to understand one final piece. Why did Daniel do it? What was the motive? Because the evidence showed opportunity. It showed access. It showed deception. But motive remained unclear. Then investigators discovered another hidden detail from 1984. A detail involving Emily Carter's personal life. Something that may have been the reason she became a target. Emily had been investigating something herself. Something connected to Daniel. Something she believed was wrong. And days before she disappeared, she had gathered information. Information she planned to report. The investigation uncovered that Emily had found financial irregularities at the medical supply company. Missing equipment, false records, unauthorized transactions, and one name appeared in several documents. Daniel Mercer. Suddenly, investigators saw a possible motive. Emily may have discovered Daniel was involved in something he wanted hidden. She may have been preparing to expose him. And if that was true, then Emily's disappearance was not a random act. It was an attempt to silence her. The evidence continued to grow. But Daniel Mercer was still free. Still living quietly. Still denying everything. Until investigators arrived at his home. The moment he opened the door, he knew why they were there. After 40 years of silence, the past had finally reached him. Detectives placed the evidence in front of him. The fingerprint. The witness statements. The recovered items. The remains. The timeline. Everything that had survived decades of darkness. Daniel looked at the evidence. And for the first time, investigators saw something different. Not anger. Not confusion. Fear. A brief moment. A crack in the man who had spent 40 years hiding behind the same story. But even then, Daniel refused to confess. He maintained his innocence. He claimed the investigation was wrong. He claimed the evidence was circumstantial. And technically, he was right about one thing. A case built from decades-old evidence is never simple. Every clue must survive examination. Every connection must be proven. Every accusation must be supported. The investigators had come incredibly close. But the final battle would not happen in the interview room. It would happen in court. And before that moment arrived, prosecutors needed one final piece of evidence. Something that would connect Daniel directly to the night Emily disappeared. Something stronger than suspicion. Something that would finally reveal the truth hidden inside the old police file. Because after 40 years, the cold case had cracked open. But the most important question remained unanswered. Would the evidence be enough to bring justice for Emily Carter? Or would Daniel Mercer escape one final time? The arrest of Daniel Mercer became the biggest criminal story Greyhaven had seen in decades. A town that had once whispered Emily Carter's name in sadness was now shouting it across every news broadcast. The headline was everywhere. May 1984 cold case cracked. Old police file uncovers horrifying truth. After 40 years, investigators had finally identified the man they believed was responsible. But an arrest was only the beginning. Because in a case this old, the truth had to survive the courtroom. And the defense was already preparing. Daniel Mercer had spent 4 decades protecting himself. He knew how to avoid attention. He knew how to answer questions without saying too much. And now, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars, he was ready to fight. His attorneys immediately challenged the investigation. They argued that the evidence was too old, too damaged, too uncertain. They claimed detectives were building a case around assumptions. A fingerprint, a piece of fabric, a witness memory from 40 years ago. They argued that suspicion was not proof. And legally, they were right. A person cannot be convicted because a story feels convincing. A person cannot be convicted because the community believes they are guilty. The prosecution needed facts, solid evidence, a chain that connected every piece together. And they knew exactly where to start. The fingerprint. The small mark that reopened everything. For decades, that fingerprint had been meaningless. A partial print. An unidentified trace. A piece of evidence trapped in time. But modern forensic technology had changed everything. Experts examined the print again. They analyzed the pattern, the pressure points, the unique characteristics. And the result was clear. The fingerprint belonged to Daniel Mercer. The defense argued that the print proved only one thing. Daniel had been inside Emily's apartment at some point. Nothing more. They argued that Daniel could have visited her before. They suggested the print might have been left during an innocent interaction. A repair visit. A conversation. A normal moment between 2 people. But prosecutors had an answer. Daniel himself. Because in 1984, Daniel told police he had never been inside Emily's apartment. That statement became one of the most damaging pieces of evidence. The prosecution argued that Daniel did not simply forget. He lied. And people usually lie when the truth creates a problem. The courtroom listened as investigators reconstructed the final hours of Emily Carter's life. The story was built slowly, carefully, piece by piece. The jury heard about Emily's concerns before she disappeared. Her fear. Her comments about Daniel. Her belief that he knew too much about her life. They heard from Robert Hayes, the co-worker who remembered Emily saying she felt uncomfortable. They heard from Margaret Ellis, the neighbor who heard an argument that night. A woman's voice. A man's voice. Then silence. They heard from Walter Briggs, the repair shop owner who remembered Daniel's vehicle near the apartment. And they heard about the receipt. The forgotten gas station receipt. The one that placed Daniel less than a mile away at the exact time he claimed he was home. One piece alone could be explained. But together, investigators argued, they created a pattern. A pattern of lies. A pattern of opportunity. A pattern of someone who had spent decades escaping the consequences. Then prosecutors introduced the evidence recovered from the abandoned property. The courtroom became silent. The key. The fabric. The personal items. The remains identified as Emily Carter. 40 years after she disappeared, her name was spoken again. Not as a missing person. Not as an unanswered question. But as the victim of a crime. For Emily's family, the moment was devastating. They had waited decades for confirmation. But confirmation brought pain. Because finding Emily meant accepting something they had spent 40 years trying not to believe. She was never coming home. Her mother had kept her room untouched for decades. Now that room would remain a memorial. A place filled with memories instead of hope. During the trial, prosecutors revealed another discovery. A piece of evidence from Daniel's personal journal. The sentence written on October 17, 1984. Some doors should stay closed. The prosecution argued the words were significant. They said Daniel was referring to what happened that night. The defense disagreed. They called it meaningless. A coincidence. A sentence with no connection to Emily. The debate became one of the most intense moments of the trial. Because it represented the entire case. Was this the truth finally being uncovered? Or was the investigation forcing pieces together because people wanted an answer? The jury had to decide. But before they could reach that decision, another witness appeared. Someone nobody expected. A former friend of Daniel Mercer. Someone who had known him before he left Maine. The witness revealed a conversation that had never been reported. A conversation from weeks after Emily disappeared. According to the witness, Daniel said something strange. He said, "People stop looking eventually." The courtroom reacted immediately. Because those words described exactly what happened. People did stop looking. The case became forgotten. The years passed. The evidence gathered dust. And Daniel continued living. But the defense attacked the witness's memory. 40 years had passed. Human memory changes. Details become unclear. Stories become influenced by time. The attorneys argued that the witness might be remembering something that never happened. Again, the question returned. Evidence or assumption? Truth or interpretation? The trial continued for weeks. Experts explained forensic science. Detectives explained the investigation. Witnesses described the person Emily was before she disappeared. A woman with plans. A woman with a future. A woman whose life ended because someone decided she should not speak. And throughout the trial, one question remained. Why Emily? Why her? What made Daniel choose her? The prosecution believed the answer was hidden in the financial records. The missing equipment. The false documents. The information Emily had discovered. They argued Daniel feared exposure. He believed Emily could destroy his life. So he silenced her. But the defense offered another possibility. They claimed there was no direct proof Daniel committed murder. They claimed investigators were connecting unrelated events. They reminded the jury that 40 years had passed. 40 years where evidence could disappear. 40 years where witnesses could make mistakes. The final arguments approached. The courtroom waited. The community waited. Emily's family waited. After 4 decades, everyone wanted the same thing. The truth. But truth in a courtroom is not determined by emotion. It is determined by evidence. And soon, 12 people would decide whether the old police file had finally revealed the horrifying truth. Or whether one of Maine's darkest mysteries would remain unanswered forever. Because after 40 years of silence, the final chapter was about to begin. The courtroom was silent. Not the silence of an empty room. A different kind of silence. The kind that comes when everyone understands the weight of what is about to happen. 40 years of questions. 40 years of rumors. 40 years of a family waiting for answers. All of it came down to one decision. Was Daniel Mercer the man who took Emily Carter's life? Or was he simply the person standing closest to a tragedy he did not cause? The jury had heard everything. The fingerprint. The hidden note. The recovered evidence. The witnesses. The timeline. The lies. Now they had to decide what those pieces meant, because the prosecution never claimed one single piece of evidence solved the case. They argued it was the combination. 1,000 small details forming one undeniable picture. The fingerprint proved Daniel had been inside Emily's apartment. The witness statements showed he had been near her before she vanished. The records showed he had lied about his connection to her. The recovered items connected Emily to the property linked to Daniel. And the old police file revealed something investigators in 1984 never had. Modern technology. The ability to see what had always been there. During closing arguments, prosecutors stood before the jury and returned to the beginning. October 17, 1984. They described Emily Carter walking home. A woman expecting another ordinary night. A woman who had no idea that someone she knew would become the center of a mystery lasting decades. They told the jury about the apartment, the untouched belongings, the missing coat, the damaged doorway, the fingerprint. They argued the scene was not random. It was controlled. Planned. Created by someone who wanted investigators to believe Emily simply disappeared. Then they turned to Daniel Mercer, a man who had spent 40 years telling the same story. A story that changed only when evidence forced him to change it. The prosecutor asked the jury one question. If Daniel Mercer had nothing to hide, why did he spend 40 years hiding the truth? The defense responded immediately. They reminded the jury that suspicion was not enough. They said the prosecution had built a powerful story. But a powerful story was not the same as proof. They attacked every major piece of evidence. The fingerprint. They argued Daniel could have left it during a harmless visit. The witness memories. They argued people can forget. The journal entry. They called it meaningless. The property. They argued that old evidence does not automatically prove guilt. And most importantly, they reminded the jury of what was missing. No confession. No eyewitness to the crime. No recording. No direct evidence showing the exact moment Emily died. The defense ended with a warning. Do not convict someone because a mystery finally has a suspect. Convict only if the evidence proves the truth beyond doubt. The jury left the courtroom. And Greyhaven waited. The days passed slowly. People gathered outside the courthouse. Reporters watched every movement. Emily's family sat quietly. The town that had carried this mystery for 40 years now waited for the final answer. Then, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Daniel Mercer entered the courtroom. Older now. His hair gray. His face showing the passage of time. A man who had lived almost an entire lifetime since Emily disappeared. The judge looked toward the jury. The room became completely still. The verdict was read. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. For Emily's family, the moment was overwhelming. There was relief. There was sadness. There was anger. There was the pain of knowing that justice had arrived decades too late. Daniel Mercer was sentenced to life in prison. The case that began in 1984 had finally reached its conclusion. But outside the courtroom, another question remained. How had this happened? How had one man managed to avoid justice for so long? The answer was uncomfortable. Because Daniel Mercer was not protected by a perfect plan. He was protected by time. In 1984, investigators did what they could with what they had. Technology was limited. Resources were smaller. Evidence that seems obvious today was invisible decades ago. The fingerprint database did not exist. Advanced DNA testing was not available. Digital records did not exist. The truth was trapped inside evidence that nobody knew how to unlock. And that was the haunting lesson of Emily Carter's case. Sometimes the answer is not missing. Sometimes it is waiting. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. After the trial ended, investigators continued reviewing old cold cases. Because Emily's case proved something important. Forgotten files can still contain living evidence. Old photographs. Old reports. Old mistakes. All of them can carry information. Information that survives long after people forget. The May 1984 cold case became an example across the country. A reminder that time does not always erase the truth. Sometimes time protects it. But even after justice was served, Emily's story did not end. Her family continued speaking about her. Not as a victim, but as a person. They remembered her laughter, her kindness, her plans. They wanted the world to know Emily Carter was more than a cold case file. She was a daughter, a friend, a woman whose life mattered. The abandoned property where Emily was found was eventually removed from public attention. The old building was gone. The land became quiet again. But for the people of Grey Haven, that place would never be ordinary. It represented decades of unanswered questions, decades of pain, and finally decades of truth. Yet one final mystery remained. A question investigators still discussed privately. The hidden note written by Detective Thomas Reed. The warning that said, "Check the door again. Something was missed." Why did Reed know? What exactly did he suspect in 1984? And how close had investigators really been to solving the case back then? Because the truth was not discovered in 2025. It was discovered in 1984. It was sitting inside that file the entire time. The fingerprint. The witness. The warning. Everything existed. The world simply was not ready to see it. And that is what makes the story of Emily Carter so haunting. Because somewhere inside thousands of forgotten police files across America, there may be another name, another photograph, another piece of evidence waiting in silence, another family waiting for someone to look again. The case was solved. The verdict was delivered. But the memory remained. Because some crimes are remembered not only because of what happened, but because of how long the truth had to wait before anyone finally listened. The verdict brought an ending to a story that had lasted 40 years. But for the people who lived through Emily Carter's disappearance, there was no simple ending. There was only the moment when the unanswered questions finally became answers. And sometimes answers hurt more than uncertainty. For decades, Grey Haven lived with a mystery that followed families through generations. Children grew up hearing Emily's name. Teenagers became adults. Adults became grandparents. And through every passing year, one question remained carved into the memory of the town. Where did Emily Carter go? Now they knew. But knowing the truth did not erase the pain. It only gave the pain a name. The investigation that reopened in 2025 became one of the most talked about cold case breakthroughs in the region. News organizations across the country followed the story. The headline was repeated again and again. May 1984 cold case cracked. Old police file uncovers horrifying truth. A forgotten file. A forgotten fingerprint. A forgotten warning. All of it had returned. And together, those pieces had destroyed the lie Daniel Mercer had protected for 4 decades. But behind the headlines and courtroom cameras was a much deeper story. A story about mistakes. About time. About the fragile line between justice and forgetting. Because the most disturbing part of Emily Carter's case was not that evidence was missing. It was that the evidence had been there all along. The fingerprint had always existed. The witness memories had always existed. The old police notes had always existed. The truth had never disappeared. It had simply been buried under years of silence. After the trial, investigators returned to the original case file one final time. They wanted to understand what happened in 1984. Not just who was responsible, but how the investigation failed. They studied the decisions made by the original detectives. They reviewed every interview, every report, every piece of evidence. And what they discovered was both heartbreaking and understandable. The detectives in 1984 were not careless. They were not ignoring Emily. They were working with limited tools. They were searching through darkness without the technology available today. At that time, a fingerprint without a match was just a fingerprint. A partial print on a door meant little. A small piece of fabric meant almost nothing. A witness remembering a sound was considered weak evidence. But 40 years later, those same details became powerful. Technology had changed. The world had changed. The evidence had been waiting. One investigator involved in the Modern Review later described the case as a reminder that cold cases are never truly dead. They are only silent, and silence can be broken, especially when someone is willing to open the file again. But while authorities celebrated the breakthrough, Emily's family faced a different reality. For 40 years, they had lived between hope and grief. They had imagined thousands of possibilities. Maybe Emily was alive. Maybe she had started over somewhere. Maybe one day the phone would ring. Maybe one day someone would knock on the door. Her mother, Linda Carter, kept believing because believing was the only way she could survive the uncertainty. She preserved Emily's belongings. She saved every letter, every photograph, every memory. The bedroom remained untouched, a frozen moment from a life interrupted. But after the truth was revealed, the family had to make the hardest transition. They had to stop waiting. They had to accept that Emily was never coming back. The room was no longer a place of hope. It became a place of remembrance, a memorial to a woman who deserved more than becoming a headline. Because that was the danger of cold cases. The world often remembers the mystery, but forgets the person. Emily Carter was never just the woman from the newspaper. She was not just the missing woman from Maine. She was someone with dreams, someone with friends, someone who had plans for the future, and someone whose life was taken away before she had the chance to finish her story. The investigation also raised questions about how many other cases might still contain hidden answers. Across America, thousands of cold case files sit inside police departments. Boxes filled with photographs, reports, evidence, names of people who disappeared, names of victims whose families are still waiting. Emily's case became proof that old evidence can still speak. A fingerprint can wait 40 years. A photograph can wait 40 years. A forgotten note can wait 40 years. But eventually, someone may look again. And when they do, the past can come rushing back. However, one part of Daniel Mercer's story continued to trouble investigators. Even after his conviction, they still studied his behavior. They tried to understand how he managed to live normally for so long, how he could build relationships, hold jobs, talk with neighbors, while carrying the secret of what happened to Emily. Psychologists who examined the case noted something disturbing. The ability to appear ordinary does not always reveal what exists beneath the surface. Some people hide behind routine. They hide behind kindness. They hide behind normal conversations. And sometimes, the person nobody suspects is the person who has been closest all along. That realization changed how investigators approached future cold cases. They stopped looking only for obvious criminals. They looked at overlooked connections. People who were interviewed once. People who seemed harmless. People whose names appeared briefly and disappeared. Because Emily Carter's case taught investigators one unforgettable lesson. The first answer is not always the right answer. Sometimes the person standing at the edge of the investigation is actually standing at the center. The final evidence review also revealed something emotional. Detective Thomas Reed, the original investigator who wrote the mysterious note, had been closer than anyone realized. His family later explained that Reed carried frustration about Emily's case for years. He believed the answer existed. He believed something had been missed. But he never saw the day when the truth was finally uncovered. He died believing the case might remain unsolved forever. But his note survived. A message written in a moment of doubt. A warning from the past. A reminder that someone had looked deeper. Someone had questioned the official story. And someone had refused to completely let Emily be forgotten. That note became one of the most powerful symbols of the case, because it represented the thin connection between the past and the present, between the detective who searched in 1984 and the investigators who finally solved it decades later. 2 generations of investigators. One truth. One victim. One unanswered question finally answered. But even with justice delivered, Greyhaven remained changed. The town that once whispered about Emily's disappearance now spoke her name openly. A memorial was created. Friends and strangers gathered. Flowers were placed. Stories were shared. People who never knew Emily personally came to honor her. Because some cases become more than investigations. They become part of a community's identity. They become reminders of what was lost. And what was finally recovered. The Maine 1984 cold case was officially solved. Daniel Mercer was convicted. Emily Carter was returned to her family. The old police file was no longer a symbol of failure. It became a symbol of persistence. A symbol that even after decades of darkness, the truth can still find a way back. But somewhere inside the evidence archive, among thousands of other forgotten cases, there are still unanswered stories. Still names waiting. Still families hoping. Because the past does not disappear. It waits. And sometimes, all it takes is one person opening an old file. One person asking one forgotten question. One person noticing one tiny detail that everyone else missed. Just like the fingerprint that finally cracked the mystery of Emily Carter. The final chapter of the Emily Carter case did not begin inside a courtroom. It began in a quiet evidence room. A place where the world outside continued moving while thousands of forgotten stories remained frozen in time. Rows of shelves. Thousands of boxes. Thousands of names. Thousands of lives reduced to paper, photographs, and evidence tags. For 40 years, one of those boxes carried the mystery of Emily Carter. A woman who disappeared on a cold October night. A woman whose name became a symbol of unanswered questions. A woman whose story seemed destined to remain unfinished. Until one fingerprint changed everything. The fingerprint that reopened the case. The fingerprint that forced detectives to look again. The fingerprint that proved the truth had never truly vanished. It had only been waiting. When investigators closed the final report, they wrote something that would become the most important sentence in the entire case. The evidence was always there. The failure was not the absence of clues. The failure was the inability to see what those clues meant. And that realization changed everything. Because cold cases are not just about the past. They are about the present. They are about the possibility that somewhere, hidden beneath years of dust and forgotten memories, an answer still exists. Emily Carter's story became a warning. A reminder that time does not erase crimes. It only creates distance. And sometimes distance allows the truth to hide. For the Carter family, the years after the trial were complicated. There was justice. But there was also grief. A conviction could punish the person responsible. But it could never return the years that were stolen. It could never return birthdays. Holidays. Family conversations that never happened. It could never return the future Emily was supposed to have. That was the cruel reality of solving a cold case. The truth can arrive decades late. And sometimes it arrives carrying pain. But for Emily's family, there was also something they had not felt in 40 years. Certainty. For decades, uncertainty had controlled their lives. Every phone call created hope. Every unknown person created a possibility. Every unanswered question created another wound. Now finally they knew. The waiting was over. The mystery was over. Emily's name no longer appeared under the word missing. She was no longer a question mark. She was remembered. And that mattered. Because one of the greatest tragedies in unsolved cases is that victims can slowly become forgotten. Their photographs fade. Their stories disappear. Their names become nothing more than lines inside old records. But Emily Carter was not forgotten. Her story survived. Her name survived. And the investigation that took decades proved something important. Every victim deserves to be found. Every family deserves answers. Every unanswered question deserves another look. After the conviction of Daniel Mercer, investigators continued examining his history. Not because they doubted the verdict, but because they wanted to understand the full picture. They reviewed his movements, his relationships, the years between disappearances. They searched for patterns. They looked for connections. Because one question continued to follow them. Was Emily Carter the only person whose life had been destroyed by Daniel Mercer? The investigation revealed several suspicious incidents connected to different periods of Daniel's life. But not every question could be answered. Some evidence was gone. Some witnesses were no longer alive. Some mysteries remained trapped in time. And that was another painful lesson. Justice does not always reveal every secret. Sometimes it only reveals enough. Enough to bring accountability. Enough to bring closure. Enough to tell the world that a victim's story mattered. The abandoned property where Emily was discovered became a symbol of the entire investigation. For years, it was just another forgotten piece of land. Nobody knew what it held. Nobody knew what secrets were buried beneath the surface. But when investigators finally searched the area, they discovered the truth. Not because the truth had appeared, because someone finally looked. That simple act changed everything. Looking again. Questioning again. Searching again. Those were the actions that solved the case. Not luck. Not coincidence. Persistence. The same persistence that kept Emily's family searching. The same persistence that pushed detectives to reopen the file. The same persistence that transformed an old fingerprint into the key to a decades-old mystery. The story of Emily Carter spread far beyond Maine. It became one of those cases people remembered. Not because of the horror alone, but because of the lesson behind it. The lesson that every forgotten file still contains a possibility. Every old photograph could hold a clue. Every overlooked witness could hold a memory. Every piece of evidence could be waiting for the right moment. The world often thinks cold cases are solved by dramatic discoveries. A confession. A hidden recording. A shocking revelation. But the reality is often different. Sometimes a cold case is solved by patience. By one investigator refusing to ignore a detail. By one scientist examining something everyone else considered useless. By one person deciding that an old question still deserves an answer. That was what happened with Emily Carter. A fingerprint. A forgotten note. A damaged door. A memory from a neighbor. A piece of fabric. Small things. Almost meaningless alone. But together they became a story. A story that had been silent for 40 years. Until finally it spoke. Years after the trial, the people of Greyhaven still remembered Emily. They remembered the fear that surrounded her disappearance. They remembered the years of uncertainty. They remembered the moment when the truth finally arrived. The town had changed. The streets had changed. The people had changed. But one thing remained. The memory of a woman whose life mattered. And that may be the most important part of any investigation. Not the headlines. Not the courtroom. Not the attention. The victim. Because behind every cold case is a person. Someone who laughed. Someone who loved. Someone who had dreams. Someone whose story deserves to be told. Emily Carter was not just a cold case. She was not just a headline. She was a daughter. A friend. A person whose life was interrupted. And after 40 years, her story finally reached its conclusion. The old police file was closed. The evidence was returned. The investigation ended. But the lesson remained. Somewhere across the country, other files are still waiting. Other families are still searching. Other investigators are still looking through forgotten evidence. And somewhere inside those old boxes, there may be another fingerprint. Another photograph. Another clue that everyone missed. Another truth waiting in silence. Because the past does not disappear. It leaves traces. Sometimes small. Sometimes almost invisible. But they remain. Waiting for someone willing to search. Waiting for someone willing to believe. Waiting for someone to open the file one more time. And that is why the story of the Maine 1984 cold case will never truly disappear. Because 40 years after Emily Carter vanished, one forgotten fingerprint proved something the world had almost forgotten. The truth can be delayed. The truth can be buried. The truth can be ignored. But the truth does not die. It waits. And eventually, someone finds it. Months after the verdict, Greyhaven slowly returned to normal. The cameras disappeared. The reporters left. The courthouse doors closed. The crowds that once gathered outside faded away. But the memory of Emily Carter remained. Because some stories do not end when a judge delivers a sentence. Some stories continue living in the minds of the people who were left behind. For decades, Emily's disappearance was a wound that never healed. A wound hidden beneath everyday life. People went to work. Raised families. Built new homes. Celebrated birthdays. But somewhere in the back of their minds was always the same question. What happened to Emily? Now the question had an answer. But the answer carried its own darkness. The final investigation report became one of the most detailed cold case reviews ever conducted in the region. Investigators documented every mistake. Every overlooked clue. Every moment where the truth came close but slipped away. Not to blame the officers from 1984, but to understand. Because history has a way of judging people with information they never had. The detectives who worked Emily's original case did not have modern databases. They did not have advanced forensic tools. They did not have the ability to compare decades-old evidence in seconds. They had notebooks, cameras, interviews, and instinct. They followed every path they could see. The tragedy was that the most important path was the one hidden in plain sight. Daniel Mercer, the man who appeared cooperative, the man who answered questions, the man who stayed close enough to the investigation without ever becoming the center of it, until time exposed him. That was the terrifying lesson investigators carried forward. Danger does not always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, a coworker, a familiar face, someone people trust because nothing about them seems unusual. And that was what haunted the investigators most. Not just what happened to Emily, but how easily someone could hide behind normal life. After the case was solved, the police department created a complete digital archive of Emily's investigation. Every document was scanned, every photograph preserved, every piece of evidence recorded. The department wanted to make sure her story would never again disappear into a forgotten box. Because another cold case might depend on what happened next. Another family might be waiting. Another victim might still have a voice. The fingerprint that solved Emily's case became a symbol. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was impossible, but because it was simple. A tiny mark left behind by someone who believed they had escaped forever. Daniel Mercer spent 40 years believing time was on his side. He believed memories would fade. Witnesses would forget. Evidence would disappear. He believed the past would remain buried. But he misunderstood one thing. The past does not need to chase anyone. It waits. Every action leaves a trace. Every decision creates a record. Every secret creates a weakness. And eventually something breaks. For Daniel Mercer, that weakness was a fingerprint. A fingerprint left behind in a moment he thought nobody would ever examine again. A fingerprint that survived longer than his lies. Years later, investigators who studied the case often returned to the same moment. The first time they reopened the old file. The first time they looked at the evidence again. The first time they realized they were not searching for new information. They were searching for meaning inside old information. And that difference changed everything. Because solving a cold case is not always about finding something new. Sometimes it is about seeing something differently. The people of Greyhaven continued to remember Emily in their own ways. Some left flowers at the memorial. Some shared stories. Some simply said her name. Because after 40 years, Emily Carter was finally no longer defined by the night she disappeared. She was remembered for the life she had before it. The friendships. The kindness. The dreams. The person she was. That was the final victory. Not just finding the person responsible, but restoring Emily's identity. Restoring the truth. Restoring a name that had been trapped inside a missing person report for too long. The May 1984 cold case began with a disappearance. It ended with a discovery. But between those two moments were 40 years of waiting. 40 years of searching. 40 years where one family refused to forget. And maybe that is the most powerful part of the story. Not the investigation. Not the courtroom. Not even the evidence. The most powerful part was that someone kept looking. Because every cold case represents a promise. A promise that a person will not become just a forgotten file. A promise that someone will continue searching. A promise that even after decades pass, the truth still matters. And somewhere inside another old evidence room, another file is waiting. Another name. Another photograph. Another unanswered question. Maybe the answer is hidden in a report nobody reopened. Maybe it is inside a piece of evidence nobody understood. Maybe it is sitting beneath years of dust. Waiting. Because the truth has a strange habit. It hides. It disappears. It becomes forgotten. But it leaves something behind. A trace. A mark. A clue. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to look again. End of extended version.